So this is an idea I kinda came up with on the fly recently. Why not have my subscribers who follow my YouTube community tab ask me visual novel related questions and I make a video answering them? This makes it a good way for me to talk about myself and get people to ask questions about me since I'm curious what they want to know. In this video, I'll be covering the questions that got asked on the post on my community tab on Sunday, May 22nd, 2022. The first question from ShatterluX asks, in which VN universe you would like to live the most and why? What would be your position? Protagonist? So to be honest, I kinda like real life. So choosing something with fantasy wars of any kind is out of the picture for me. So I guess I'd choose some kind of moege or slice of life universe with a good selection of heroines. Might as well go with making lovers, since there are good adult age love interests both in the main cast and side cast. Though obviously I'd want Mashiro, but Akari would be a pretty close second. SingBiriBiri asks, Ange, which succubus femdom visual novel would you recommend? So I'm not really a fan of either succubi or femdom, so I haven't actually read any. However, I am interested in Kimagure Temptation, which does have a single succubus main heroine, but apparently there's actually an interesting mystery plot to it. I just haven't read it yet, so I can't personally recommend it, but people do seem to like it. Next, Kiospiuys asks, have you ever tried pirated visual novel? Also, who is the worst and the best visual novel developer in your opinion? So for the sake of YouTube, general legality purposes, and a little bit of virtue signaling, all I'm going to say is I've been making an honest effort to buy every visual novel I've read in some way, and I implore you do so as well. Visual novels are a super niche medium, and money talks, so if you want more, be sure to support them when you can. As for my personal least favorite visual novel developer, I would say Chewable Soft, since every visual novel I've tried from them heavily disappointed me despite having good premises. As for my personal favorite, probably Pull Top, specifically the visual novels written by Konoasta, aka If My Heart Had Wings and A Sky Full of Stars series. Next, Aneski asks, why would one drop SingBiriBiri just as it's about to get interesting? So for context, I've only read Down the Rabbit Hole Part 1 with a little bit of Part 2 in SingBiriBiri or Wonderful Everyday. To be honest, based on what I heard what happens in this visual novel later on, I wasn't already particularly interested in reading it. I'm getting sick of visual novels that have a really bad or boring opening chapters, and SingBiriBiri having a boring Yuri chapter intro with a confusing train part at the end just made me lose any interest I had in continuing, despite all the hype this visual novel gets. Next, Whalerynth asks, would you choose to be a member of Gaia or Guardian? And depending on the answer, what would your ability and or focus on summoning be? So for context, he's referring to Rewrite. Without getting into spoilers, I suppose I would choose Guardian as I consider them the lesser of two evils. As far as abilities go, usually my go-to requested superpower would be something related to super speed. Next, jdssnake asks, top 10 One-sama heroines in visual novels, what are some lesser known but older translated VNs, such as the most forbidden love in the world? One-sama heroines, aka exalted big sister type heroines, is a bit tough. I can't think of many that exist, let alone that I like. One that comes to mind is Orihime Shiratori from A Sky Full of Stars, since she was kinda quirky and was a big inspiration for two Kohai generations, as well as the Six Stars Club in general. As for lesser known but older translated visual novels, a few that come to mind are Crescendo, translated by Jast, which is a pure slice of life drama with some unique heroines like the school nurse and a former prostitute. There's also Yume Miru Kusuri, also translated by Jast, which has 3 routes with dark dramatic themes like drugs and bullying. Vlad asks, if you had to choose which visual novel protagonist to be, who would you choose? I basically answered this earlier, so I'll just go with Kazuma from Making Lovers. Mr. Subaru Duck asks, is there like a fantasy isekai visual novel? If so, which one is the best you have read so far? Surprisingly, the visual novel medium barely has any, especially given how prominent they are in anime. In fact, the only 2 isekai visual novels I can think of that are translated are Harem Kingdom and Hatsumita. I've only read Harem Kingdom, which I thought was really funny, good ol' Smee. I'm kinda interested in Hatsumita, given that it's by the same writer and artist as the Grisaya series. Kyo Yami asks, what are your thoughts on Soul Press's history and their eventual downfall? Oh boy. I know a lot of people were angry, but honestly, it was particularly disappointing for me since I was one of their most loyal followers for a while. In fact, the CEO, Zeviax, and Soul Press Company in general lived pretty close to where I currently live, so they were kind enough to let me chill at their company from time to time. Under One Wing was my favorite visual novel released by them. I really liked Kazusa in particular. I also really liked their honorific toggle idea they put in every visual novel. It was a neat feature to allow people to choose whether to have a more literal versus localized experience, instead of having only one option. However, even before their tax evasion reveal thing, I was disappointed at their increasing lack of communication, especially with things like the Newton Kickstarter goods never actually shipping out. Speaking of Kickstarters, the Iroseka one barely reaching its goal, then not ever coming out by them was a huge kick in the balls. Thankfully, Nekonyan very recently saved the license, but as of now, all the other visual novel licenses by Soul Press are gone, which is super unfortunate. I was pretty interested in Nukatashi, and kinda interested in Choose Your Mistress. Aldo Martinez asks, favorite visual novel OST? Plus, have you played any pre-Windows visual novels or adventure games, example, Yuno and Eve Burst era? And if so, which are your favorites? OST means original soundtrack for everyone's information. Overall, I'd say the Umineko series is easily my favorite visual novel soundtrack. The amount of both variety and quality is pretty amazing. I have not read any MS-DOS or PC-98 visual novels, and to be honest, I'm not really that interested. I'm much more interested in the remakes of things like Yuno and Dokyusei. ASid-kun asks, when can we collab for a vid on the fun parts of a VN? Ooh woo. So if you don't know, ASid-kun is a relatively recent visual novel YouTuber. He focuses on degenerate reviews. He'll talk a little bit more about his opinion on the degenerate side of visual novels, but they're otherwise pretty well edited videos of his opinion on the visual novel plots and characters. So a bunch of different visual novel YouTubers have considered doing a collab of some sorts, but sadly things just haven't happened yet. When will a collab actually happen? Who knows? RK asks, do you reread visual novels? If so, which ones, and for what reasons or intentions will you go back to a story? Additionally, what non-visual novel games do you play? So I very rarely reread visual novels. The only reasons I've reread anything is if a new version or translation released, so the experience would pretty much be new. Some examples include Umineko when it got the PS3 graphics and voice patch. I actually originally read the fan translation and the unvoiced Umineko version with the OG graphics. And I also reread the original Majikoi when it got a brand new translation courtesy of Jast. I read the fan translation originally and was also one of the few times I read partial patches. I still remember the Miyako 85%. My favorite non-visual novel games I like to play include things like Pokemon, fighting games like Super Smash Bros., Street Fighter and BlazBlue, and casual multiplayer games like Fortnite or Final Fantasy XIV. Baisuposter asks, with no regards to realism, what would be your dream team for a single visual novel? Artist, scenario, composer, voice actors, anything else you can think of. And what would you expect from it? Oh man, so I've actually thought about this before. As far as dream team goes, my scenario writer list would definitely be some mix of Loose Boy from Shar no Kuni and g-senjou, Kono Asta of If My Hearted Wings and Sky Full of Stars Fair, and whoever writes the comedy for SME visual novels like Making Lovers or Harem Kingdom. For composers, I definitely want Dai and ZTS, who did songs for Umineko, and maybe some stuff from whoever composed for Sky Full of Stars and Bokuten. For vocal songs, I guess it'd be nice if there's some mix of Akiko Shikata, Kotoko, or Haruka Shimotsuki. My ideal storytelling style would have a mix of wholesome slice of life similar to A Sky Full of Stars or Marshmallow All the Way Home, and strong unique character building like Shar no Kuni. I'd love a ladder, chapter, or route system similar to Shar no Kuni, g-senjou no Mao, or Ayuku no Yustia. Basically, a way to have all the characters' development in the main story. I'm 11 and asks, can you share your physical visual novel collection, if you have one? And what's your favorite addition to said collection? New subscriber here. I sure can. Here it is. This collection includes Japanese versions of Rewrite and Rewrite Harvest Festa, the Switch versions of the Grisaya Trilogy and Aokana, the Japanese version of Remember 11, the Jazz release of Crescendo, both the English Switch version and the original Japanese Vita version of If My Hearted Wings, Machikoi A Hound After in Japanese, the Switch version of Doki Doki Literature Club Plus, both the original Japanese and Jazz English version of the original Majikoi, the Japanese version of Sujiro-san no Junai Road, the Jazz release of Yume Miru Kusuri, and the Manga Gamer release of the original version of Higurashi Kai. My favorite of the collection? Probably one of the rewrite releases just because of the merch I got with Kotori and Chibimo. Albiero asks, what visual novel plots or concepts do you like the most? I mentioned this earlier, but I really like Shar no Kuni's. Since it's a plot and setting that's all about specifically rehabilitating character flaws in a harsh way, it was really interesting to see what happens, since there was no supernatural stuff, but somehow still had really well done and developed characters and stuff. Kanyuu asks, how much time do you spend on visual novels when you read? I'm definitely the type that only reads one visual novel at a time. As for my total read times, I tend to be on the medium to fast speeds, according to VNDB votes. Jose Cruz asks, if you could be the MC of one visual novel of your choosing, what would you go with and why? I already answered this earlier. Freestyle asks, has your taste changed since you started reading visual novels until now? If so, to what? And what else other than visual novels takes up your time nowadays? So despite my likely reputation of liking moege and H scenes, believe it or not, I started off being one of those people who only read karage or story-oriented visual novels. These are the first 20 visual novels I've read, and as you can see, most of them are popular story or drama-oriented visual novels. The only two missing here are the Umineko series, is because I reread them after the PS3 voice graphics patch came out. They'd be my second and third visual novel respectively. While I still like story-oriented visual novels, over time, I've come to like moege or slice-of-life visual novels just as much, if not more. I just like comfy and heartwarming stories while still having a bit of character development, and there have been a bunch of times when story visual novels kinda disappointed me in some way. At least with moe visual novels, I tend to get enjoyment a lot quicker as they provide what I want almost immediately. As for what else takes up my time other than visual novels, I mentioned the games I liked earlier. Otherwise, I basically just like weeb stuff like anime, though sadly I haven't been watching much of that as much recently. I also have an 8 to 5 job, so that takes away from hobby time. Zeroth Stille asks, what publisher would you say is your go-to regarding visual novels? That is to say, you'd probably instantly get any visual novel they'd release. Honestly, none. I've personally never been that loyal to any company, even for anime or video games. I always judge purchases by interest in specific products, not overt company loyalty, and no company has perfectly consistent releases. I suppose the closest for English translators is Nekonyan, since I've tried most of their visual novels, though there are a few I haven't even bought yet, like Parquet or Hello Goodbye. And there's also a bunch of visual novels I've bought that I haven't even started reading yet. Jayveedee asks 4 questions. Which visual novels would you like to see in anime form? Anime you would like to see in visual novel form? Any visual novel related apps I'd like to see? And favorite anime, manga, or light novel? I'll keep these answers brief. I definitely want a Machikoi anime adaptation that at least minimum covers the common route, and where the characters don't feel out of character. From the little I've tried of animated visual novel adaptations, they're shallow fanservice at best, so I'd prefer not to read them. While I do like VNDB and VN Manager, I'd still like improvements to them, especially in the UI front, or possible competition. My favorite anime tends to be either between Dragon Ball Z plus Super or the Aria the Animation Natural Origination series. Average White Guy asks a very complex question, basically boiling down to, what do you consider completing a visual novel? I'm not going to read out every choice he typed out to save on time. My overall personal opinion is people can choose to read however much they like until they feel they got a complete experience. I personally generally try to finish every route, but not get every choice in CG. For romance-heavy visual novels in general, I think it's certainly fine to just read the heroines you like and leave it at that. For visual novels that are story-oriented with routes, I would say at a minimum, read the true route or the perceived true route, and any routes necessary to reach that true route. Finally, I would say getting all choices and CGs is not necessary for true completion, but can be nice to have if you're a fan. Rodrigo asks, what is your opinion on Western visual novels and the difference between the Japanese ones? Well, the only Western visual novels I read are the popular or memed ones like Katawa Shoujo, Doki Doki Literature Club, and that KFC Colonel Sanders visual novel. I'll admit, as a weeb, I haven't been as interested in Western-made visual novels due to me not liking their art and story concepts as much. I'm not entirely opposed to Western visual novels, as I did enjoy Katawa Shoujo and the Doki Doki Literature Club Plus side stories, but most I've seen have not really interested me that much. Potato Name asks, your top 10 visual novel antagonist list. So I don't think I can list 10 antagonists I like a lot, but I'll list a few that I like. My number 1 favorite is easily Erika Fururo from Umineko. Her bitch factor was very over the top, and mixing in English and general trollery was hilarious to watch. She carried a lot of the answer arcs for me. I also liked Hozuki from Sharan no Kuni and Mao from g-senjou no Mao as well. There's a few others I kinda like, but none worth mentioning. I'm just generally not big on most antagonists for the most part in visual novels. And those are all the questions that were asked in the original post. Hopefully for the people who asked questions, the answers I gave were satisfying enough. If you missed out on wanting to ask a question, definitely keep track of my YouTube community tab. I post kinda infrequently these days, but I'd love to be able to post there more because I think it's a really cool feature. Feel free to leave any comments about any of the questions I answered below.